Before we get started on this video, I don't want to hear anything. Andrew, it's like already almost February in 2023. I know. I'm late on this video, but it is what it is. We're still going to do it. Hello, if you're new here, my name is Andrew Givler. I'm an author, YouTuber, booktuber, not necessarily in that order. I like to stay busy. And this is my channel where I talk about books, reading, writing, and everything in between. Today, we're going to do the roundup of all the books that I know that I read in 2022. I'm going to rank them. Now, here's the caveat before we start. Making anything creative is incredibly hard. Writing, videos, you name it. Trust me, I know that pretty well. I live in those trenches. So first of all, any book that's on this list is a book I recommend reading, okay? If there was a book I read that I hated so much that I would never recommend it, it's not on this list, okay? Two, we're ranking purely off of enjoyment on this tier list. So that doesn't mean that a book that gets a high rating is the best written book or the most technically correct, or, you know, maybe it was a small budget indie book that didn't have as much time in editing or something like that, but I enjoyed it. Likewise, a book could have excellent writing, might just not have been as fun for me, and it'll be a little bit lower. But all the same, you should read these books. I highly recommend them. And if for some reason you wrote one of these books and you see this video, this is just my personal enjoyment. I know just as well as you that everyone's relative and everybody's got different tastes, all right? And if you guys enjoy this kind of content, do me a huge favor, hit the like button, okay? It helps. Also, subscribe to the channel. We're trying to grow it, so hit that subscribe button. We're on the road to 10K subs. I haven't said that in a long time. Either way, it'll be fun. Now, without further ado, here are a bunch of books that I read in 2022. That rhymed, holy crap. I'm gonna pick things kind of at random because I just like downloaded them in the order I did. So right off the bat, I'm gonna pick like, why did I do this? I downloaded my own book, all right? I'm putting that in D. Nope, it was mediocre at best. I don't know how that ended up on this list. I think it's just I downloaded all of my Amazon stuff. Yes, my book came out last year. I did technically read it to make sure that it worked on the Kindle. We'll put it down there. So if you're on this list, you're above me, just like by default, okay? There you go. We're gonna do this one right here. It's In the Shadow of Lightning by Brian McClellan. Now, I know he's written some other stuff. I haven't read it before. This was my first thing I'd read. I know he's really popular. I was interested to check it out. The magic of this world's pretty cool. It has to do with you channel magic like through glass, and there's like different types of glass, like a milky glass I think heals you, and there's like glass that'll make you smarter, faster, stronger, etc. But you can only use them for so long, and like depends on how like susceptible your body is to something called glass rot, if I recall correctly. And this book was interesting because I really enjoyed the beginning, and then in the middle, I don't know, the pacing, like it slowed down for me a little bit and I wasn't enjoying it. And then in the end, I really enjoyed it. So I'm glad I went all the way through. I will read the rest of them. I think I'm gonna put it in B right now because it didn't hold my attention the whole time. But I was really glad I finished it. You know what I mean? It was, sometimes you hit that midpoint and you're like, oh, I've already read half the book. Should I just finish it? I'm a big finisher. I don't like not finishing a book I start. Anywho, I finished it. I'm glad I finished it. I will continue to read the series. I'm gonna put it at B. Up next was the Bone Ship series by R.J. Baker. I've recommended this one before. I think my editor for this video is already reading that series and he says he likes it. Isn't that right, editor? Tell him. Mm-hmm. It was a really, really cool, like fantasy, kind of dark, twisted, Pirates of the Caribbean style thing, but with sea dragons. It was really, really cool. I really liked the world. The ending made me cry, which doesn't happen to me. I don't get emotional from books very often. I'm gonna put it at A, I think. It could be S, but I reserve the right to move any of these at any time, okay? Remember also, if you're not familiar with the tiers, S tier is like godlike, unbelievable, highest level of enjoyment. And D tier here was like, I enjoyed it, but like I had to work my way through it. That's why my book's down there. I gotta stop dunking on myself. Please buy my book. Up next is Priest of Crowns, which is by Peter McLean. Yes, got that right. I'm amazing. And this is the finale of the War for the Thrones book, which is four books. I really, really like this series a lot. And I thought that it ended really strong. I enjoyed it the whole way through. There's a lot of progression. There's a lot of growth. The first book is really like, everybody always just says it's fantasy Peaky Blinders, and I think that's really, really fair to describe. I really like Peaky Blinders too. So I'm tempted to put it in S. At the series, I'm sort of, the Bone Ships I kind of read all at once. I found Priest of Crowns, the original, which was Priest of Sorrows, I think is the very first, or Priest of Bones, when it came out, so I had to read them one at a time. So I only read Priest of Crowns, which was the finale this year, but I give this series as a whole an S. I would put it up here. Highly, highly recommend. Next up was To Blackfire Keep by Anthony Ryan, which I also really enjoy. That's a great series. I think this is book 4 in that series. It's like the 7 Magical Sword series. I've talked about it on the channel before. I really enjoy it. My only complaint about them is they're a little short, which like that happens, right? But they're almost like bite-sized episodes that come out. They go and they deal with like one thing, and that's not bad at all. But in terms of my enjoyment, I love those big, thick tomes sometimes that have a lot of things going on and a lot of plot lines, and they're juggling a lot. I like a little bit of complexity. So I really enjoy it. They're a great read, but they're also like a fast, easy read. I think I'm gonna put it at B for now, but again, reserve the right to change my mind. Up next, let's do Master of Sorrows by Justin Travis Call, I believe. Yes. This was the first book in a new fantasy series. It got recommended to me, I think, off Amazon. I checked it out. It was fun. It has a really cool world going on. It has like the kind of like boy coming of age sort of thing, but might be the chosen one. I really like the end of this book, but some of the journey to get there didn't quite hold my attention. I wasn't like super into it, but the payoff was great. So I think book 2 I'm really excited about. So again, worth a read. I like it. It didn't quite hold my attention the whole way through, personally. Next, we're doing Lesser Devil by Chris Rocchio, who, as you guys know, is one of my favorite authors. He does The Empire of Silence or the Sun Eater series. The Lesser Devil is a novella written in that universe about the main character's brother, like him living and doing stuff while his brother's gone. It was really fun, enjoyable. I don't usually like novellas, but I actually quite enjoyed it. I'll probably put it in B. I didn't care about his brother as much because obviously there's not nearly as much lore surrounding it. It was cool to see some of the other stuff going on, but a lot of it was like I just wanted it in context of the main character. That's how I read a lot of like novellas set in universes, which is my own failing, not the books, but that's just kind of how I felt about it. Up next is a book called Tigana. This is by Guy Key. It's considered one of the books of like the most beautiful writing of all time. So if you look up like fantasy novels with beautiful writing, this is one of the ones you get. I found it actually when I was doing research for my fantasy novels with beautiful writing book or video that I booked. My poor brain falling out of my head at all times. And I enjoyed it, and it does have beautiful writing, but I think that, man, Name of the Wind really set the bar for beautiful writing and plot come together. And the plot of this was cool. It was unique. The way that like basically this one wizard was so upset because when he tried to conquer this island or nation, they fought back and killed his son, that when he finished them, he made everyone forget that they existed, except for the people who had been born there. And now he's like trying to wait for all of them to die out so that the like memory of this place is like burned off the earth. And it's the rebellion facing off against it. It was cool. It was a really interesting journey, and I'm really glad I went on it. But it didn't really captivate me the same way. I don't know why. Every time I'd read it, I'd be like, man, this guy's really good at words. And I wasn't drawn into the story quite as much as I would have liked to. I think it's worth reading even just for the prose, but also it's a good story. Again, remember, if you're on this list, you should read it. Like everything in this book list comes recommended. Next one is a surprising one that most people haven't heard of. It's called Bringing Home the Rain, The Redemption of Howard Marsh, Book 1 by Bob McGow. And I met Bob randomly on Reddit. Like he commented on a thread about, I think, my book or some other fantasy book, and he mentioned like his because we had kind of similar style covers. And so I went and checked it out, and I read it, and I actually really enjoyed it. I want to read the rest of the series. I haven't had time, but it's on my to be read. And basically the premise is it's urban fantasy, but the main character is kind of like a down on his luck, ne'er-do-well living in Alabama, like, you know, out in the woods. He's poor, he's a criminal, and just kind of not a great dude. It's him, like, and his magic forcing him to do good things. And I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really well written. I thought it was unlike any other urban fantasy I'd read. We could talk about urban fantasy for a long time. I'm gonna do an urban fantasy video soon. We'll talk about it again, but really good, really enjoyed it. We'll read the rest of the series. I put it up there with the bone ships right now for me. Up next, we have Cold as Hell by Rhett Bruno and Jamie Castle. Now, I know Jamie. I got to meet him. I had already read Cold as Hell before I met him. I really enjoyed this book. One of the other series I want to talk about is doing like a what's called a weird Western, or like the way I pictured it is like urban fantasy set in the Wild West, magic and cowboys crossing over. I think that's super sick. They did it. I think they did it really, really well. I have a couple of quibbles about the book, but I've told Jamie about them to his face, and he laughed. And the next one comes out this year. I already have it pre-ordered. That's where we've talked about it before. It's on my pre-order list. I'm excited for it. In fact, I might even move it to, oh man, right there. Okay. It was really good. It was really, 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 really good. And I highly recommend it. Okay. Up next, we're going to do a hot take. And I'm sorry. You guys know that I love the Dresden Files. You know that I have been heavily inspired by Jim Butcher. He definitely was really influential on me as I was learning to write and practicing. Definitely an author I look up to this day. And I eagerly await any more Dresdens that come out. The Law was a short story novella type thing that he put out that takes place a little bit after the most recent book, Battlegrounds. It was okay. I kind of felt like it didn't need to exist. Because one, I'm of the red letter media opinion that if you introduce new characters out of canon, they don't count, right? So General Grievous in the third Star Wars prequel they didn't introduce him. And everyone was like, well, yeah, if you'd read the comics. Nope. It's got to be in the main thing for it to count, right? You can expand the story elsewhere, but if you don't tell me in the main story, does not count as far as I'm concerned. And two, then it kind of was like insight into where the character was at a little bit, but it wasn't fulfilling. So I think that I'm going to put it like right here, like right at the top of C. I listened to it. I would probably not listen to it again, if that makes sense. Whereas like the B tier, I would probably be willing to read again or listen to again. That makes sense. I think that's actually a good way to do it, right? I'm glad I read everything in C. I'm glad I read, but I probably won't read again. All right, we're getting down to the wire. Only a few fun ones left. Okay, we're gonna do The Last Shadow Knight, which is actually written by my friend Michael Webb, another fantastic author and guy. I got to meet him and know him this year. Super cool dude. This is a really great young adult fantasy, right? Like coming of age, all that cool stuff, being trained in magic and avenging wrongs, you know, the classics, what makes YA fantasy great. It was a lot of fun. I haven't gotten to read the whole series yet, but it's really well received, and I can tell it's a hit in its genre too. I don't read a ton of YA anymore. It's not as much where I hang out, but I do love a good YA novel every once in a while. Every once in a while, mwah, you know, there's chef's kiss. So, ton of fun. I think I put it like here-ish is where I want to put it right now. Only because, like I said, YA tends to not quite just be my vibe, but I really enjoyed it. And I think that if you like YA, you'd like it. Everything left is a banger. Just looking at this list, by the way. If you're like, man, he's being a harsh critic. No, I read a lot of books I liked this year. Okay, up next is Ashes of Man, straight to S tier. The newest full novel of the Sun Eater series. It was really good. I will say, because it didn't make it on this list, I don't think. When did it come out? Hold on. So it turns out that I missed something, and I want to address this because Ashes of Man, I think, is S tier for me. It's actually probably here, right? It's probably, so far of the books we put out, the book I enjoyed the most this year. However, Kingdoms of Death came out in 2022, and somehow I missed it when I was grabbing all the books that I read in 2022. I did not like Kingdoms of Death as much. I think it's the weakest one in the, I always want to call it the Empire of Silence. The Sun Eater series, I would put it down at C to B, somewhere right there. Like, I would probably read it again, but only if I was reading through the whole series. I would read it because I would be ready to read book 5, which is Ashes of Man. Otherwise, I probably would not. I don't know. It was not my vibe. It was important to the story, but it held some notes for a long time that I didn't enjoy as much. Now, I just saw a video he did recently, actually, where he said that that's because 4 and 5 are supposed to be one book, and his publisher made him split him. So that could be kind of why that happened, but I don't have a graphic for it, so just imagine it's like right here. Okay, up next is another contender for best book of the year. James Butcher, Jim Butcher's son, Dead Man's Hand. I've done a full review on this book. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a really cool new breath of fresh air in urban fantasy, but the style of urban fantasy that I really like, which is that sort of like hard edge, Dresden inspired, but not Dresden stuff, you know, because there's like 2 types of urban fantasy, right? There's like the romance urban fantasy and like the fairies and light and dancing, and then there's like the grittier stuff, and I tend to like the grittier stuff. I think Soul Fraud's a little bit grittier. It's funny gritty, but it's still gritty. That's my vibe. James Butcher nailed it. Highly recommend. I also read He Who Fights with Monsters. I would probably put that like right here. I read it because it's the most popular lit RPG one, and I want to learn more about that genre. I don't love lit RPG. Sorry, everybody calm down. I like game lit. I like progression fantasy. Lit RPG tends to be a little too mathematical for me, right? And that's what I discovered reading this. It's a fun adventure. It's really long. It goes a lot of interesting places. The world is pretty cool. The class systems are pretty cool. Like, I enjoyed it, and I see why it's popular. It's just not 100% my vibe. That being said, if you like lit RPG, you should read it because he's the king. You know, he does like the most. He sells the most. He crushes it. I just tend to be more game lit. We'll talk about that in a minute. Or progression fantasy. We'll talk about that right now. Because Will White's Dread God came out. Will White is like, Shirtaloon is to lit RPG, aka He Who Fights with Monsters, as Will White is to progression fantasy. They're both kind of like the kings of those 2 spaces. Dread God by Will White is like the penultimate book of the Cradle series, apparently, which is shocking to me. I don't know how the book's going to end in 1, but we'll see. It was super fun. Highly enjoyed it. S tier for sure. Progression fantasy, by the way, so if you're unclear on this thing, I'm going to do a video on this too eventually. Progression fantasy is where the magic system is around you, like growing and getting more powerful, like maybe leveling up, but it doesn't have to be a video game, right? It's more just like an idea. Gamelit is where like video games and magic kind of coalesce a little bit together. In fact, we're going to talk about Battle Mage Farmer, which I'm also going to put in S tier. which is gamelit, right? It's where like, oh, you might have a quest system, or, you know, like, and that's how your magic is derived or something like that. But it's not full on like, here's your stat sheet, here's your dice rolls, here's your whatever. That lit RPG is like, you are in the video game. And that's like where it just like loses me a little bit. It's still good. I still read some of it and enjoy it. And I have a lot of friends who write it. And I've told this to their faces. But for me, I like when the line's a little more blurred and it still feels like a real world that rather than a video game world. But that is like such a minute personality difference. That's just me. It has nothing to do with any of the stuff they're making. Anyway, S tier. Another one that was really exciting and surprising to me was Gunmetal Gods. I have not read the second one yet, but this was a really, really cool one. I think I actually got recommended it by Daniel Green. He told me about it. And I checked it out. I really enjoyed it. It's really weird, in a good way, in a like not a lot of used fantasy trope kind of way. And you'll see what I mean as you read, like the stuff about the angels, the way they work was like really fascinating and strange, but like different from anything else I'd ever read. I will read the second one. I just haven't gotten to it yet. Really enjoyed the sort of cultural mishmash because it's essentially like Middle Eastern Janissaries against like fantasy Catholic paladins, right? But then everything's been twisted and turned on its head and run with. But that's like some of like the inspiration that's being pulled from them. And you see both sides and like what they're warring on. Really, really cool book. I look forward to reading the rest. A tier for sure. Up next is Hate Machine, which is another urban fantasy that's Eric Carter, written by Stephen Blackmore. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoy that series. I will probably put it right. It's either the top of A or bottom S of me. I'll probably put it right here. I will read everything that happens in the Eric Carter series. It's a ton of fun. Next up is Queen Amid Ashes. That was another one of Christopher Rocchio's Sun Eater universe. It's a novella. It's an adventure that the Sun Eater, Hadrian Marlowe, has in between some of the books. I enjoyed it. It was great. It was cool to kind of see like a historical event that they refer to in the books actually happen. Again, it's sort of filler, so I wouldn't probably reread it, which might mean that I'm gonna put these right here because I wouldn't probably reread them. I don't need to reread them for the main story. Even if I did a reread of the series, I wouldn't feel the need to go back to them. So that's why they're there. But for a one-time read, they were great. Next up was The Obsidian Path. This one's by Michael Fletcher. It's kind of interesting. It's a really unique thing where like this fantasy series where this guy became like an all-powerful demonologist necromancer and he became corrupted. And so they like set up a thing to, I can't really explain it. Basically, he's like coming back to life to try to like rebuild himself and has to kind of like come to terms with the monster that he used to be and like try to be better. And it's all about like, what does power do to you and where are you going and stuff like that. But the thing about it, I need to like reread the ending because when I read the ending, I didn't think it was the ending. So that caught me really off guard. It's also really dark. It's probably the darkest book on this list. And there's a book on this list called Hate Machine, okay? So really, really dark, not for the faint of heart. That one probably has some trigger warnings on it, but it was also interesting. So I'm glad I read it. If you're into that kind of thing, you should take a look at it. But I don't know, I didn't understand the ending, and that really threw me. So I have to think about it more. It's on my list, but definitely take a look at it, and if it seems like the kind of thing you'd like, you should read it because it is unusual. There's not a lot like it. Last but not least, this is not on purpose, was Hunger of the Gods. This is the second book in John Gwynn's The Shadow of the Gods series. This is really great. I've talked about it before, like the kind of like fantasy Viking stuff. I might have to put him here. Really, really, really good. Really enjoyed it. Can't wait for the next one of that. Like all of these right here, like I can't wait for the next one of this one. Can't wait for the next one of this one. Really want to read the rest of these. Looking forward to the next one of this one. Like these sequels are out. I just haven't read them yet. I will probably read another He Who Fights with Monsters. I haven't had the time. Same with Last Shadow Knight. I will read the rest of it. Everything in B, I will finish reading. To be fair, everything in C, except for one, is already done, right? Like I'm gonna read the rest of the Dresdens. Tagana's a standalone. The Obsidian Path is done. These ones are novellas. The Master of Sorrows, I believe, has more, but they aren't out yet. So I will probably check those out when they come out. But yeah, I think I'm happy with this list. Again, I highly recommend reading anything on it. Just because it's lower on here doesn't mean you shouldn't read it. It means that my particular high level of enjoyment of the cream of the crop that I read this year, it was a little bit lower, but I still enjoyed it enough to tell you about it. The ones I didn't enjoy, I didn't tell you about. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know if you agree with my ratings, if you've read any of these. If you're interested in any of them, they will be linked in the description below. If you use my link, I get a little kickback, so go check them out. In the meantime, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. I'll see you guys in the next video.